lost almost 100 grand. We're negative on a flip by almost $100,000.
So you said you did the brokerage first, and I know a little bit about the detail, just recalling from memory, but a lot of people get in the business, become successful brokers, find themselves flush with some amount of cash, and think to themselves, well, why shouldn't I invest? I don't know if that was some of your journey, but maybe like where was the moment where you shifted and started buying? And maybe that was different on the residential, and maybe there's like two shifts, doing it on the residential, and then there was maybe another shift where things had to change in going after and owning commercial assets. So maybe we could start there.
Yeah, definitely multiple shifts for sure, as I believe that it's a lot of little shifts, right? Like versus like a big epitome kind of thing. Or epiphany, right? For me, it was in the residential business because I ran a residential team, the typical residential broker type of aspect where, at one point we were doing over 100 transactions a year, but a lot of it was investment sales, finding people rentals, flips. We're doing some wholesale deals. There was one deal that I watched one of my investors make like $100,000 in a matter of 30 days. And then I think I made $4,000 or $5,000 in commission on the deal. And I was like, this guy didn't do anything. He used hard money. I don't even think he put the 10% down because he had told me that he had raised money from a group. So he put no money down and he made $100,000 in a matter of 30 days from like close to close because the property didn't really need anything. And it was like he kind of wholetailed it, right? Like, the retail version of it. I made like $5,000 on the listing commission. And I was just like, I clearly don't understand the full scope of what investing is. I was like, I feel like I did, but in that moment, I felt very uneducated because I was like, because if I knew, I would have been able to transact on that deal, and I couldn't. And then about a year and a half later, that deal came across my plate, and I made like 35K, but I did it. It was like for the first time ever, I finally did my own wholesale deal, which I had done other wholesale deals, but it was always with a partner. This was like the first time where I bought a deal and flipped it, and it was like a magical moment. I was like 24 years old. I was like, wow, like holy cow, I can do this, right? Like I instead of making $5,000 or $4,000 or $7,000 in commission, I can make 35K. And I was like, this is pretty cool. I got to learn how to do it. And then obviously I knew enough to then take that money and move it into a 4-family, which I ended up flipping. I sold that property to like 35,000 and that became my down payment on an FHA deal, right? So I lived in a 4-family and I was like, okay, I'm starting to do the investing thing, right? And all of a sudden I built up, to like about 20 units, including a couple single family and a couple multifamilies, but all still under that residential umbrella, nothing ever bigger than 4 units. And then all of a sudden one of my investors is like, hey, I'm looking for multifamilies in this area, really prominent area, a lot of, great deals to be had. But he's like, I want something bigger. Right? I kept selling him 2 families, 4 families, 2 families, 4 families, 3 units, whatever. He's like, I want something bigger. I was like, if you can bring me anything up to like 50 units, I was like, I'll be interested. I'm like, 50 units? I'm like, it just blew my mind. I was like, I'd never experienced doing a deal like that. And, my family owns a lot of retail. So I always was kind of in the leasing side of that and understand retail, but I was like, I never sold anything. I only did leasing and only for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, I found him a deal, and it was really beat up, like 16 family, okay? Like probably the most beat up property I've ever seen in my life. Every unit was disgusting. People lived there, and I was just, I couldn't believe it. I can't believe this guy's about to buy it. But then what happened was, I negotiated this deal and I made 4% on a deal and it was closed for about $2.5 million. So I made about $100,000. I really didn't do a lot of work. I maybe toured it once, went back a second time during an inspection, but overall the deal didn't really need me and it closed in less than 90 days. I was like, holy cow, like this commercial thing's pretty cool. So I finally got a taste for the commercial side and, on the brokerage side, now we've been a part of several hundred million on the brokerage side. But then what really hit me was about 6 months after that transaction, because I got hooked and I was like, I got to find more deals. And I found this 110 family, which we can go into as much depth as you like on this one, but this was super interesting. I call up a guy and I'm like, go through my spiel. Okay, I work with a client who's looking to buy a couple of properties in the area, and I was just curious if you'd be totally against selling it along that lines. He goes, yeah, I'm open to selling it. When are you going to be in the area? And I'm like, funny enough, I'm actually going to be in the area later today. I wasn't, but I lied. And it was only 20 minutes away, but I was like, let's go. I got in the car and I headed down there. I go meet the guy. We toured the building, got in a few units. Another kind of beat up property, but wonderful location, not to maintain whatsoever. And I knew that there was some interesting value. And I knew kind of how to underwrite a property, not to the extent I do now, but kind of. And at the we're sitting on like the porch. It's a 10 family. I'm sitting out front with the guy. And he's like, so what do you think it's worth? That's what he said to me. He goes, I don't know, you make me an offer. And in that moment, I didn't know exactly what to say or what to do. I just kind of went with my gut and I said, probably make an offer around 1.35 million. He goes, I'd agree to that. And I'm like, what just happened? Like all of a sudden, like I couldn't believe what had corresponded, I said, okay, let me talk. My response was, okay, great. Let me talk to my partner. I'll get you an offer by later today. This is like 4:00. I call up a guy who I just helped him sell another property for a 1031. I'm like, hey, I think we're buying a property together. I had no idea what the game plan was, but we ended up negotiating a deal where we bought this deal together 50-50. So I didn't make any commission, and I just rolled all my commission, which I would have made about 100 on this. I rolled 100% of my equity. So instead of upselling the cost of the property and having the seller pay commission, whatever, we just rolled all that equity into the deal, and we bought it 50-50 essentially. Okay. And I was going to manage it. And we bought it for 1.35. Not even 12 months later, we got an offer for $2 million cash.
Nice.
And so we bought it. It was a wonderful deal. That deal, even like about 30 days after buying it, I realized in that moment that there is nothing better than what I just experienced. I need to figure out how to do this 100 times a year. It blew my mind. I mean, that was several years ago, but it was just, it was absolutely mind blowing to experience that. And it completely shifted how I look at every deal. Instead of from the realtor mindset, I'm like, hey, like, why would I? Because I could have just told the guy, hey, I think as a broker, I could have just as easily said to him, hey, I think you could list this for 1.8 million. And he probably could have sold it. But instead, I said, hey, I told him what I would pay for it, which was a fair assessment. And I thought back to my old guy with the investor where I could raise the money, I could do the deal, right? Like, it doesn't have to be my own money. And we ended up buying the deal, and, we have over $1.25 million worth of equity in the deal now today.
Nice.
And it's like that $80,000 to $100,000 commission check would have been cool, right? But at the same time, it's like it's not worth anywhere near $500,000 worth of equity that cash flows almost $10,000 a month.
Yeah, we have something like 22 people who are like deal makers on our team. And I'm big on the principal, acting as the principal. So my first deal, Henry, I acted as the principal, but I was kind of like dirt broke. I was 26 years old and I made a $6,000 assignment fee. And that was like, might as well have been $20 million. It was on a $5,500 house. So we're talking about more than 100% increase in the price.
I've never heard of that before. That's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, thank you. But I was acting as the principal. It's like, what would an agent? First of all, an agent wouldn't even take this person's call because it was in such a rough section of town. But 6%, 10%, a $1,500 minimum commission, $3,000 commission. So I came in as a principal only to be, the investor mindset, always the buyer. I never really ventured onto the broker side of the field to like go out and broker deals. But in our business at Diamond Equity, a lot of times we'll have brokers try to do what we're doing. They try to make the leap by joining the team. And that can be a challenge because they're so stuck in that habit of, oh, you can list it for this and then sell it for this, list it for this and then sell it for this, where when it comes time to say those words, I'll give you what was a 1.35. I mean, trying to like have that come out of the broker's mouth the first time is like this real odd, like Herculean effort. In fact, sometimes they accidentally say 1.6 million and they totally had written down 1.35 million, supposed to say 1.35 million, and they slipped and sneezed out 1.6 million as the offer and turned it into like, maybe it's still a deal, but a lot of times you put yourself over your skis and you're out there too high on the price.
Has happened to me many times.
Yeah, me too. And probably amongst every single person on my entire team, we've accidentally said the too high offer, even though we had something different written down. So it probably happens to the best of us. The broker has almost no risk in the deal, and the principal has risk. So you're dancing a jig, you got $1 million in equity that's positive. You stepped in and took a calculated risk at 1.35 million. Anything could have really happened. The city could have came and condemned half the building. The city could have said, oh, there wasn't permits for this and such and such. All the sewage lines could have been bad. There could have been a fire in there and you're fighting the insurance company for 2 or 3 years and they don't pay out. So there's very real risk in every transaction for a principal because you marry the property. For sure. The moment you take the deed in any transaction, you're now responsible and liable if any kind of environmental issue were to pop up. Most people are like, we're buying houses. This is great. There's like, totally clueless. Well, in the state of New Jersey, especially, they thought it was a good idea to bury oil tanks for years and years and years and years and years. So there's very real environmental risk when someone takes the deed in New Jersey. If someone didn't know any better, they came in from California. Oh man, I'm getting a smoking deal. Look at this, $250,000. Buried oil tank might be $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 if it had leaked to dig out all of that dirt and then get rid of it, right? So a lot of times there's...
The exact story has happened to me too on a flip.
The tank? Yeah. And what was your exit cost?
We lost almost 100 grand.
Like, meaning you lost it. It was not a profit of 100 grand.
Yeah, I'm saying we were negative on a flip by almost $100,000.
Did you know the tank was there on day one?
No.
Case in
Yeah,
point.
exactly. And
Case in
I mean,
point.
like, this is something that again I stress to everybody when you do inspections. We just didn't end up doing it. We ended up closing in 3 weeks and just didn't come across the we didn't think about it and until it was too late.
Yeah, I'm in a deal now. I hope we just lose 150. I hope 150 is we'll be pretty happy to lose 150 on that deal. The architect's plans took forever. The city hates us because we didn't pull the permits right. We went through 3 different contractors. Like the list goes on and on. And it's like we're not even done the rehab yet. We're
Yeah,
still working through. We have to now finish this whole rehab so that we can go lose money. But like if we try to sell it now without the rehab, we're probably going to lose double the number that we're going to lose in the end. Assuming the market holds up and we get out of that deal,
100%.
six figure loss. So the risk is real on the principal side, and the broker side does not come with anywhere near that level of risk.
But
Am
I
I am
also
I
believe
accurate there?
yeah, well, I look at it like this. I agree that most brokers have zero risk. I think that is 100% that is a very true statement, and I have felt that way in a lot of different deals. But I also do believe that there's this happy medium of wholesaling, which no one talks about in this brokerage world. It's a very, like, mum's the word, don't think about it that way. You're a fiduciary to a client. You become a fiduciary when documents are signed. I'm not your fiduciary just because I called you on over the phone, right? Like, that's not how this works. If we sign a document saying I'm going to list your property, I then become your fiduciary. But I am like, it's not like your financial advisor is your fiduciary because you're talking to them over the phone. That doesn't make any sense. They could say anything that they want over the phone. It does not matter. There's nothing signed. It's like a stock, same thing with stock. Like, people take it a little bit too literally. Where, like, for me, I'm like, hey, what makes the most sense? Well, I want a win-win-win solution. The seller wins, I win, buyer wins. How do I do that? We all make the most money possible. Everybody's happy. And it's not just about making the most money, but we do it the cleanest fashion with the least amount of risk to me. There's instances where I'll look at a deal where I'm like, hey, I just want to be the broker and I'm totally cool with it. Then there's other deals where I'm like, hey, there's like 200 grand on the bone here. I don't want to own this property, but the spread between what the seller's willing to accept and a buyer's willing to take, and I don't want to buy this for whatever reason, but I can make a quick 200 on this, which I'm literally dealing with on a situation right now. I'm just going to take a wholesale deal, right? I'll lock it up for, this deal for 700 and we're going to flip it for 9, right? I like that deal all day long. No problem. It's in an area I probably wouldn't buy anyways, but the spread's good. And then you have the situations like this, this multifamily where I'm like, hey, I 135, I don't even care if I'm going to flip it and make 500 grand. I'd rather just take down the deal and take the cash flow and hold it for equity purposes, write it all off, do a cost seg, call it a day. So, and it's like every single lens works. But it's not like, I feel like too many people are just pigeonholed to one vertical, one way of doing business. And for me, I'm like, hey, there's a lot of ways to look at every deal. First is a principal and say, what would a principal do? What would a principal offer on this deal? Where they need to be to make some money? Then, okay, well, we can't get it for that price. What's next? Wholesaling. Okay, well, what's the spread? Where's the seller at? What can we get a buyer at? Is there enough of a spread here where it makes sense for us to get busy? Next, it's like for a broker, for a broker, it's like, okay, well, if there's not enough spread for us to wholesale this between, A and B here, let's go into a broker fee and maybe we make 3, 4, 5, or 6%. Oh, well, that doesn't actually make any sense because, the seller wants way too much money. Cool, no problem. Hands off. And hey, Mr. Seller, would you be totally against if we marketed the property for sale for you? We'll see if we can try to get you some offers. We'll put it on the market and call it a day. And every single property fits one of those different sectors. And like, I'm not judgmental. There's no energy or emotion towards it. It just fits one of these boxes. We move on that. And that's it.
I recently read What It Takes. Have you read What It Takes by Steve Schwartzman?
Yeah, fantastic book. His
Oh, yeah.
autobiography.
About How to Make $1 billion by Brad Jacobs.
I literally have that book on my night table in my bedroom.
So both of those guys had one of the same takeaways. For those that don't know, Steve Schwartzman is the founder of Blackstone. He put that together. Sam Zell was one of his first earliest clients, and they did a ton of business together. Steve Schwartzman, what's that?
Then he bought his portfolio.
He actually wholesaled like 50% of that portfolio on day one,
Amazing.
like $19 billion double closing. I don't think he actually took the deed. I think they just got assignment fees at the table to make it work. I don't have inside knowledge on that, but the way he talks about it makes it sound like they did not double close, which would have been smart because $19 billion of transfer taxes would be like an extra billion and a half dollars or something throughout the country. Sure. So,
be insanity.
Well, one of the biggest mindset shifts that occurred in here was both of them nonchalantly said, look, you just got to work on big deals. There was no explanation. There was no doubt. There was no do all this other stuff. There was no fill in all the blanks with doing everything that comes down the pike. It was like, we're only going to work on big deals. That's it. Why are you going to do anything else but do a big deal? The way that Brad Jacobs says it on in his book, which I listened to on Audible, and the way Steve Schwartzman talks about it, the billionaires are saying just work on big deals.
100%.
And so for the shift to commercial and my own personal portfolio, to me, a big deal is some like $2 million takedown or like a fucking $13 million self-storage development. And then I listen to those guys and I'm like, okay, it puts it into perspective here a little bit. These are still, I guess, big deal to me though.
I mean, hey, I'm sure there was a point where that was a big deal to them too.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny. So I was on the phone with a broker today shortly before we recorded this podcast. And he's describing an illustrious career with national tenants opening, and he had an illustrious career, exited a business and did a bunch of things. But one of them was 40 acre town center development, anchored by a Target. And I was like, oh, the way he's talking about it, he's giving me the credibility, but he wasn't the principal there. It was like some other guy was the builder principal and he kind of helped, put the tenants together, keep component there, but he didn't take the risk, in the 30 acre freaking development. Like it's probably, if I had to guess, a $40 million property in today's dollars to maybe $70 million property. But like I caught that the risk level wasn't quite there.
For sure. By the way, those are two great books I'd recommend anybody take a look at, read them front to back. I've reread How to Make $1 Billion so many times over. And I couldn't agree with you more that I feel like, people, like I literally just had a training where I talked about increasing your sales price, where it's like people go, oh yeah, I mean like, sure. Yeah. Like, it's kind of a simplistic concept, increasing your average sales price every year, whether you're wholesaling your average fee or your average, average deal size, right? Or whether you're brokering, or even purchasing, right? Like just the simplicity of it makes sense. But how many people actually strategically go, this is the plan to get us from where we are average sale price to here? Because if like I was, I've done the math 1,000 times where like I was selling $300,000 houses about 10 years ago. My average fee was like $5,000 or $6,000, 2%. And it's like, I did the math then 10 years ago. And I remember going to a seminar where we talked about making $1 million. And it's like, when you're making, call it $5,000 a deal, to make $1 million, you're talking about 17 transactions a month. It's a ton of people, different types of clientele, transactions, attorneys, title companies, emotions. I mean, it is incredibly frustrating. Where now we do that, which would be $85,000 a month. I'm like, we do that basically every week right now. And it's like, and it's sometimes it's one deal. Sometimes we do that we do one deal that covers that for an entire month, right? Like, so it's like, I would rather, and I was joking around with some of my coaches, I'm like, if I could do $10 million in one deal every single year, I'd be thrilled. It doesn't, it's that level of think where I'm like, hey, like, I actually don't care about doing hundreds of transactions. I mean, I'm probably going to end up doing them anyways, but until I find the way to do $10 million in one transaction one time a year and call it a day and spend the rest of my time investing and spending time with my family. But it's like that level of think of saying, hey, like if I was going to do $10 million in one deal, what strategic path do I have to get there? What would be my path to do that? Well, I'd probably have to find a deal for about 100, 150, maybe $200 million that I could sell for 5% more than I have it locked up for. You could make $10 million in one deal. It's not overly complex. One of my coaching students on a live call was on the phone with a guy with a $145 million deal, 700 plus units. It's like if we locked that up and somehow got him to agree to, let's just say 120 million, and we found a buyer for 130 million, you make 10 million bucks. It's like, it's just moving to zero. It's the same thing of a $120,000 single family house in the middle of XYZ area and selling it for 130. You find a couple good buyers, it's just so fascinating where it's like all of a sudden now the conversation shifts so much and where the impact ends up being 1,000-fold of like the deals we used to do.
Yeah, I guess the good question, or the question I asked myself maybe a year or two ago, what am I going to say no to in order to make space for the bigger deals? We're not going to do a flip that we can make 35,000 on. 35,000 was a flip I'd been happy to do 10 years ago. Going to have to be a little more selective. And if I were starting in the business today, there's something to be said for doing those kind of things and earning your stripes. You got to go and, buy, because your bankroll is what it is. You're buying something for 100, 150 grand, putting 50 grand in it, sell it for, 250, and you walk away with like 38,000 after all the interest is paid and the closing costs and all that. That's great. great, right? It kind of gets you started. And we see this trend too with like new flippers, new investors. They first get in the business and they're going to buy those deals, and they're kind of easier. Maybe the construction's not as much, hair on the deal in terms of the level of construction or the oil tank in the ground or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's raising $350,000 in cash. Kind of hard. There's more people that who could write $150,000 or $200,000 check to cover that rehab and be your private lender than $350,000 or $400,000. And same if you went to 700, 800, 900, a million, 2 million, and on up, right? There's less people available to do those kind of loans. So there is a place for working your way up in the numbers, but I think being intentional for me about getting uncomfortable about participating in very large deals over the last, it's been 3 years since I've started to collect much larger assets myself. And I think maybe I'll focus in on the uncomfortable moment. When I bought a house, a rental property about 8, 9, 10 years ago, it was $55,000, I think. One of my partners, wholesaled to me, made 5,000. I was like so bent out of shape about whether or not the tenant was actually paying. And finally came a moment, the guy's like, well, then don't buy it then. Either you wire the money or you don't. Okay, I guess I'm wiring the money. It felt like, maybe that money's going to be gone forever and this is going to be like a major problem and headache for me. The money came back. I sold it for 110 grand, 4 or 5 years later. I had to evict the tenant. It was a big hassle. All the headaches I feared actually came true, but luckily the market moved and I made money. The same fear of sending the wire. So for me, if I'm like, Henry, you call me, you're like, hey, I need $250,000. We're going to do this part of the deal, and this is how it's going to work out, and da-da-da-da. If I'm like, Henry, I'm going to do it. I'm not backing out. I never have. If I say I'm sending the 250, the 250's coming. But even still, even though I know I'm going to do that, I have the verbal commitment to the bigger dollar amount and the bigger deal. I say I'm going to do it, and then there's still a little internal struggle.
Of course.
Until the wire is sent off. Now the wire's sent, and it's like there's a sense of relief, even though the deal still has to get to the profit zone and has to put distributes. Tons of shit has to happen after I sent the money, but there's those 2 moments there. So number one, I'm mentally and verbally committing to the deal, saying it out loud to the person whose deal I'm going in on, and then, or even the deal I'm going to buy if it's a deal I'm buying. And then when the wire is getting sent, that's the 2 moments of commitment I notice where I bet a lot of people would stop short of verbally committing. And I know for a fact there's a lot of people who verbally commit and then don't send the wire.
100%.
Which is worse.
It's the worst feeling in the world. It's funny. I have this guy, unbelievably kind gentleman, worth upwards of $500 million. Very, very, a very savvy investor. Has been in the business for 50 plus years. And we've become very close friends. And we talk and we talk and we talk, and he's like a father to me, right? Father figure, kind of guiding me through a bunch of things, showing me all the different things. I literally have spreadsheets upon spreadsheets that he's printed out and given me, and like, you could do this, this, and this. And I never pitched him a deal, but he's always like, listen, if you ever find something interesting, let me know. I'm interested, because this guy just, basically all he does is write checks all day long. So anyways, I finally have a deal that I think's interesting. And I'm like scared to death to ask this guy for money, because I'm like trying to keep a good relationship, because I know this, like, I want to make sure that I crush it, knock it out of the park so well. This guy makes such a great return that hopefully we'll do business forever, right? And I have this deal. Like, for me, again, it was about a $2 million deal, okay? I needed about $500,000 for him, maybe 6. I call him up. I'm like, yeah, so listen, I have a deal, probably a 30 IRR in 18 months, right, or less. And he's like, how much do you need? I said, 500 grand, like begrudgingly, like terrified to say it. And he goes, honestly, Henry, if it's not, like, it was a long pause, by the way, because it felt like 3 minutes of just dead silence, even though it was probably maybe a half a second. He goes, honestly, Henry, if I'm not writing a check for 10 million, it doesn't make sense for me to do it. And I'm like, what just happened? Right? Like, I had such like weird nerves about it. Like, this guy's not even like, this guy could care so little about a $500,000 check that it doesn't even make him enough money to consider even writing the check. So I'm like, it's just these types of opportunities, these moments, for me, it's like when I'm speaking to these types of investors and, what people are looking for, the size of the deals, it's like, take a step back and realize, like, hey, like, some people, especially like when you're talking larger numbers, like you're saying, even like a $50,000 wire or the $250,000 wire, it's like every single person has their threshold where, like, if you're looking for a raise or something like that, whether it's that hesitancy or them wanting to do the deal or their desire to do the deal. Like, again, I had the same exact feeling with the $250,000 check I invested in a deal. I was freaking terrified to send a $250K check about 2 years ago. And after I did it, I mean, we made, I don't know, I think we made like 23%, something like that in like 6 months. It was actually great. It was a quick in and out kind of deal. but I've never been as terrified as sending a $250,000 check. And it's like when you talk about these massive deals, it's like there's such a parallel versus like what I actually have fears for, what you have fears for, in whether it's, same thing for realtors and investors doing their deals, right? The levels of risk and everything else. So it's a wild type of business.
Yeah, and I think back to our what it takes, we have to think bigger. And I was on stage at the Commercial Academy that you're going to be joining us at, and I'm talking about another book, which was Winning Through Intimidation. Fantastic book written by Robert Ringer, required reading for anyone in our company. So I give the presentation. I'm talking about image power. I'm talking about how we did 260 deals and 300 and something last year. And I shared, some of the numbers and everything. And then I shared whatever the deals I had cooking, my 30,000 square foot vacant warehouse and, a couple other small warehouses. And Scott, who I consider a mentor and a friend, is like, I'm going to challenge you to step up your game and think bigger and go after higher quality assets. And we're putting a shovel in the ground to build our Class A storage facility. And that's the first baby step toward the higher quality asset. And guys and gals, once you make it to another level, like another friend of mine from Fort Lauderdale, I won't mention his name. He's selling all his Class C stuff. He's got like 5,000 units, owns them all individually, and he's like only focused on Class A. And to me, it's like Class A, I'm like so used to being the junk dealer where I'm like finding the junker house and we're fixing it up, making it in something beautiful and we're repositioning it. I just haven't figured out how to underwrite at the top end. And so when you're like, hey, my buddy had 500 million, I thought that's what you were going to say was it was too small of a deal. And I'm thinking in my mind, another friend of mine bought a building for 30 million, owned it for like 18 months. I don't even think he raised the rents on the current tenants and he sold it for 60 million. And it's like, that's the deal that like, if we saw that, Henry, if we were trying to underwrite that deal, I don't even know at 30 million, we would probably just be like, oh, it's just the guy's piped, it's a 6.5 cap. It's way priced out. We're not even going to call around the brokers or anything to see if the rent's like that thing's just, it's retail junk. We're not going to spend our time. And yet, after you give your buddy the 15 million that for him putting his money in, and you take your 15 million in profit, there's the $10 million in profit deal that we're like dreaming about. So it's like still off our radar, maybe somewhat at some level, because these assets are like maybe right in front of us, but one person has to see whatever everyone else doesn't see in order to make it happen.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people also get caught up in a metric, right? Like they get caught up in an IRR, they get caught up in a price per foot. I know I have, right, or a cap rate or whatever, right? And like for me, it's always like the mistake that I've made up until like I had a recent conversation about 90 days ago with this guy where like I was just looking for 25 IRRs, like that was my bottom line metric, with being very conservative on it. And the problem with that, it's like you're just not finding enough product out there ever to make any sort of like, look, I might buy a deal or two a year, right? And obviously I'd invest with a few friends here and there, but like it was never enough to actually see some size. But now like we're on contract on almost $15 million worth of real estate today, because it's like I said, hey, like the way to scale is by I don't have to only do 25 IRRs. Like, hey, like I also make plenty of money from my brokerage business where like I don't even need the money today. So like doing 18 to 22s or, in that range, high teens for good product, in a little bit of low 20s for a little bit lesser product or quality product, it's okay. And I'll just take pieces of equity just along the way and just like, hey, like as long as I can make my investors some good rates of return, they're thrilled. I don't need the money today, and I'll take it when we trade in 5 years. It just doesn't matter. And I'm building equity over time where like making like that huge shift for me is, I feel like it's like something where like that's the difference of in 20 years from today, me being, a person being worth like myself being worth 50 million versus 500 million, right? Because I only did a deal a year versus 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 deals a year. And it's like overcoming that, like, I don't know whether it's fear or just like, the hesitancy that kind of holds you back,
Yeah, and we're in a kind of market too where, from 2019 to 2022, the kind of deals you would hear about and people would pitch were 2025 IRRs for like existing product, turnaround, multifamily kind of stuff.
Yep.
And a bunch of them actually sold and produced, 20s and 30% IRRs, but that was a market bubble.
100%.
And now we're in a contraction period for the last 2 years. This period is unlike 2008 through 2012, where there was like brand new multifamily complexes trading at 30 cents on the dollar. Banking regulations have changed, and they're no longer forced to actually exit out of the assets the way that they were in the past crises. But the crises buyers who are going to look like geniuses right now are the ones who are buying the Class A office buildings in the core downtown environments. They're dropping 30 million here, 12 million there, 8 million here. And everyone will look back and say, wow, look at how smart they were. They bought and they were so contrarian against the grain. Most of us are like, we're not touching office with a 10-foot pole. You guys are nuts.
That's me. That's me. I feel that way.
Yeah. But where else I'm going with this is I see some syndications out here where your projections are 12, 14% IRR. In fact, the guy who bought for 30 and sold for 60, he projected like 14, 16% on that one. That was his IRR projection on the rollout. And he blew that out of the water. It was probably like 80, 90, 100% return for his investors within like 18 months, right? So I think that the people who know what they're doing are not over promising, and so they're not putting something like 25 IRR out there unless it actually is a deal where that's the kind of risk you're taking, development deal, something like that. But I think that the deals people invest in now when the market is in a slump, this is like buying at the bottom. If you can find a good syndicator, a good partner, a good operator who has experience and can run a deal from start to finish, we're doing them at the bottom right now. The interest rate environment is terrible. The tax code is terrible. Hopefully that's going to change here in the next 30 days. Would be like great delusional optimism on my part. But if some things go our way, you're looking up in 3, 4, 5 years and you have 25 IRRs that you invested in thinking they were 12s and 13s and 16s, right? So this is the bottom of the market when it comes to like commercial real estate. We're in it. It may last another year, 2 years, 3 years. At some point, the deals are going to turn around, but the deals that are going to turn around and pay and be the ones everyone's bragging about are the ones that people are investing in right now. And right now is a very tough time to raise money with the tax code going against us. And everyone is juiced looking for the 25 IRRs because that's what everyone experienced in 21 and 22 and
It's interesting.
maybe a handful cashed out in 23. Not too many, though.
Yeah, but it's interesting how like just a short period of time completely shifts people's perspectives. Like that window gave everybody such a weird perspective of where things should be when that has not been ever a real ideology of what real estate investing has been forever. You know, for like the longest time. I don't even know the last time other than during COVID where you saw those, 20 plus IRRs. Like most of the time they were in the high teens. And people were fine with it, right? And like that was a good deal, right? That was a great deal. And now today, because of the the environment of today and everything else, it's like I got really skewed into like this weird thinking of 25s is where it has to be. And it's like, to be honest, you're making 25 before and I'm talking before tax, depreciation and appreciation of the asset. Where I'm like, honest to God, it's like if that's where you're at, I'm like, it's honestly, it's so rare to find that I honestly think that as time goes on for right now, I think that like you maybe if you're lucky, I don't think I've found a 25 IRR legitimately maybe more than one time in 2024. And if I find more than one in 2025, I think that like you're probably not buying enough stuff. It's so silly to me.
Yeah, and like my guy, right? You have to do real estate investing has a lot to do with luck. You can't underwrite luck in on the front end of the deal. Don't invest your money because we're going to get lucky in order to make your return. So if someone's telling me, hey, it's 12% IRR, which I did a deal, 12% IRR on my money is what the projection is. But I'm looking at the market and the long term, and we're going to hold it for 10 years. It was kind of like a tax advantage type of deal, which is why I did it. But like my delusional optimism or my like luck in the back pocket is, well, the rents are potentially going to increase more than the 2.5% that we have them at. We have a few more lots we're going to develop in the mobile home park. Some things could go our way and, we might get lucky and it turns into something better. Think about the $30 million deal that turned into 60. Completely lucky buyer. I think it was like corporate, some national wanted their headquarters here, bought the property. The lease was like expiring and everything else, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure I have some of the details wrong.
Which, by the way, would have made it worse for us to look at it.
We'd have been like $7 million. $7 million, not a penny more. This guy's out of his mind.
And we want 90 days of due diligence, maybe more.
Yeah, and you got to carry paper, 90%.
We'll give you 10% down, 3% interest only for 6 years.
Oh man, that's great. So, that's the point, right? You got to be in the deal in order to get lucky. Corporate's never going to come by your site unless you own a site. They're never going to come by all your sites, so you can't underwrite on that. Amazon moving in or Tesla across the street from your industrial property that you buy at a 7 cap. It's not happening unless you bought it at the 7 cap, right? So you got to like place these pieces on the board, these bets, probably like the roulette wheel, you're like putting down enough of them and sometimes your number's going to hit and it's going to be like blow all expectations out of the water. And I think a lot of real estate deals that we see happened like one of two ways. The guy owned it forever and bought it for free down, before the neighborhood gentrified. Well, he owned it forever. He earned every freaking penny of his exit 30 years later.
And by the way, he probably felt the same way we did when he bought it.
100%. Like he was overpaying, right?
Exactly. He was just like, maybe I should, offer him 50 grand less, like.
Yeah, correct. Well, didn't want to own it for a long time. I mean, some people are stuck in deals for the last 10 years. You couldn't get out of deals. There's a lot of deals you could not get out of the deal. All of a sudden, you're in the money when COVID hits. And, COVID turned out with the low interest rates to be a very prominent source of luck in the market.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about these types of times is like, if you can weather storms like this while competition is falling out of, like, going out of business, going bankrupt, losing money, hand over fist sometimes, and losing relationships because of the decisions that they've made in the past. When you can not only survive but thrive during these types of times, which I'm not even saying you need to do 5x the year before or anything like that, but I'm just saying small minute increases per year in these types of economic circumstances. When we have another shift, which will always come because cycles are cycles, you're gonna freaking all of a sudden have a 10x return in your business, and you're gonna be like, oh, I'm a genius. Like, you're gonna think that you're like, but no, it's because you took calculated risk during a time where most people weren't willing to do that. It's like my mentor that I was talking about, he said something very interesting to me, which was, these are the types of times where you just make enough money to get by. And he's like, he made all of his money in like a handful of the timing in the markets where the cycle exploded. He's like, he kept doing deals, but like they weren't unbelievable. He just kept doing enough deals where like they kind of made sense. He's like, he never made a killing during, for a long period of time during the low parts of the cycle. He's like, you just make enough money to kind of get by. And then all of a sudden when the cycle shifts, he's like, I made $100 million in a 24-month period of time. And he's like, everyone thinks I'm a genius, but I just bought a lot of decent deals and the economy finally coming the other direction. Right. So it's like, like you said, it's kind of like you have to be in the business to get lucky.
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the big, one of my own like operating principles or things I say a lot is like, do many deals, right? What if that deal I talk about where I'm losing that 150 grand, what if that's somebody's first deal, Henry? They're done. They're out of the game. They're out of the business. I mean, if it's a $12,000 loss on their first deal, a lot of people are going to be done. They're out of the business. If you're doing many deals, you set out to do like 5, 10, you just know you're going to do many deals. Now you have enough deals to cover that loss. Hopefully one of the other 4 or 5 you get lucky on, the market moves, you get your bidding war, and you more than cover for that loss that you have on that first deal. Do many deals.